SCORE? Well, since 1964, SCORE has helped more than 17 million entrepreneurs start, grow, or successfully exit a business. SCORE's 10,000 volunteers provide free expert mentoring, resources, and education in all 50 U.S. states and territories. How can you find us? You can find us at www.score.org/Chicago. You guys are in for a treat today. Jeffrey Nichols is a longtime uh, person that has worked in commercial and investment banking. You're going to get the advantage of taking full advantage of all the services that he knows. He's also been a SCORE mentor for quite a few years, so is an expert in helping small business owners. At this time, I turn it over and introduce and present to all Mr. Jeffrey Nichols. Jeffrey, take it away.
Thank you much, Velveeta. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to be your guide today for financing your startup, and I very much appreciate everyone listening in. You know, when I was first asked to put this together, I thought, all you need to do is sketch out your idea on a napkin and people will throw money at you, right? Well, no, that's certainly not the case. Money is like gasoline during a road trip. You don't want to run out of gas. Our goal today is to learn a lot more about funding startups. And most people who claim to know don't really know diddly about it. We are going to cover a lot of material this morning. We're going to go a mile wide and an inch deep, so please strap yourself in. Let's step back and think about the big picture. Look at these stages during the life cycle of a startup business. There's roughly 9, but this webinar is only going to deal with the 5 highlighted stages shown with the red halo. Most of the stuff that you can read, most of the things you can see on the internet, and most of the webinars that you can attend really talk about the stages that are not highlighted. Why? Because the term startup is often used for businesses that successfully launched and have been around for 5 years or more. That's not our focus here. We're focused from the idea stage to when your company breaks even. And this is also called the pre-seed or idea stage. So let's dig in. Inc. magazine went to its 500 founders. That's the 500 fastest growing privately held companies in America, and asked them to think back to their first year in business and identify what was the biggest mistake or largest challenge that they faced. And as you can see, the number 1 was shortage of capital by almost half of those companies. And note, number 2 was a distant second. So the number 1 challenge is not enough capital. I know what you're thinking. That Inc. survey was taken more than 10 years ago. You wonder whether that's still relevant, right? Well, here's the result of some diligent work done just a couple of years ago. CB Insights is it's a private analytics platform that provides market intelligence about private companies and investor activities. It's really a big data company. And so Startup Magazine worked with the data from CBI and accumulated information on 350 startups that failed. And they analyzed the failures. And the results of that work are portrayed here. Notice that the 2 biggest reasons for startup failures are all about funding. The startups either ran out of money or couldn't find financing when they needed it. The SBA, Small Business Administration, states that the average cost of starting a business today is $35,000. Now, if you're a storefront business, that might require 2 or 3 times that. But most companies are going to be able to successfully launch with well under $100,000. A sound business plan includes specific financial projections, including total startup costs. And estimating startup costs is as much about sales forecasting as it is about expense projections. Investors and lenders are going to want to know specifically how their money is going to be used. So you begin the funding search with yourself. No one's going to invest in your business if you're not willing to invest in your business. And we call that bootstrapping. But after that, you have to get out a pad of paper and begin to list other sources that you might be able to tap. And a key objective of this webinar is to help you formulate that list of possibilities. And what form will the funding take? Will it be donation-based? Will it use loans? Will any of the funding come from a source that's going to require a piece of your business because you have to give up some equity? And as you're pulling all this stuff together, you need to cultivate a funding strategy. And by strategy, I mean, A, the mix of resources, and I mean plural, you have to think of more than one. B, the specific milestones when you're going to need the money. And C, how do you plan to approach each of the sources? Now, if we return to that Inc. 500 survey, one of the other questions was, how much money did you use to start up your business? And if you look, those answers aren't far off from what the SBA said. Only 18% of those businesses replied $50,000 or more, and well over half said less than $10,000. They also asked, well, where did you find the money? And 71% said personal savings, which is really bootstrapping. 21% said family and friends. We're going to talk about that. And if you add up both the home equity and personal loans, which really puts your financial house at risk, that was 25%. And angel funding was 9%. And we're going to talk about that too. But notice there's no bank funding on this chart. And SBA loans only was a nominal 3%. So with that as background, how do you get started, right? Well, I would start by trying to answer these two questions specifically. How much money is needed and how will it be used? What do you guys think are startup costs? Well, most people make the mistake of thinking startup costs only accumulate until the business is launched. Well, let's take a look at this chart. On the far left side is the day the business is launched. Okay, that's day one. But afterwards, your business will still need to operate until you reach break even, which is where the yellow arrow is. And until you break even, you need to cover or fund any operating losses until your dream becomes profitable. But to complete that exercise, you must be able to forecast sales revenue. The reality is, it's the cash outlays until break even. It includes capital expenditures, covering your losses, and net operating capital. Now, let me describe net operating capital because it's something that never shows up on your income statement. It only shows up on your cash flow and balance sheet. To make it simple, assume you're manufacturing a product. And so you want to buy your raw materials from a supplier. And you contact the supplier, but because you're a startup, you're going to have to pay before they ship. So day one, when you place the order, money goes out the door. And let's say it takes a week for them to assemble the product and then to get it to you to ship. Once you receive it, you have to convert it to the finished good. And let's say that takes 2 weeks to convert all of that material into a finished product that you can sell. Now you're 3 weeks gone, but the money went out the door day one. Let's assume that you sell all of that product over the course of the next 2 weeks. But if you're selling to other businesses that have been established, they're going to ask for terms of net 30, which means you're not going to get paid for another 30 days. So if you add it all up, the money went out the door day one, and it may be 8 to 9 weeks later before you're able to pay back the money that went out the door. That interim time, somebody has to pay for that funding. And that's what we call net working capital. So really, the process has got two pieces. One is the one-time startup costs, and then finally, the other is the monthly operating expenses that you have to cover with a loss until you break even. And by the way, if your personal household is going to be dependent on the business, you have to also then add in all of your personal living expenses. So keep in mind that it's the yellow arrow is where our webinar ends, but we're all about from where you start to where you get to the yellow arrow. Now, some key guidelines: plan for contingencies or the unexpected. You know, if you're building a building and you're going to finance it through a bank at any point in time, the construction loan will require that sometimes between 8 and 12% of the budget be set aside for contingencies. You're not going to get a loan otherwise. And even though you've got some great engineers, some great contractors, and some fine architects, the banks are still going to force you to plan for things that you do not expect. And that's also part of what the budgeting process should be. Don't skimp on necessities. Some people say, well, maybe I don't need to pay for insurance now. That's not the right way to do it. You can always find ways to economize later, but you need to get a reality check or two. And that's where a SCORE mentor can be a very valuable source. You can bring them your information, the financials that you're putting together, the assumptions behind them is critical, and they can work to challenge and support the things that you're putting together so that you get something that really might pass muster over the longer term. But the number one thing is, if you don't have enough cash to start your business right, wait until you do. Now, everybody write this down. www.5minuteclasses, all one word, .com. When you go to that website, you're going to see a YouTube video that is titled How to Calculate Startup Costs. It's a great video, and by the way, it's 5 minutes, but there's also some suggested worksheets to follow on that website that might be helpful. And remember, if your household's going to be dependent on the business, you have to make sure to incorporate those personal expenses in the financial projections. Now, you can download what I think is the best Excel spreadsheet for compiling financial projections for free. And it's from SCORE. So if you go to score.org and enter financial projections template in the search box, the result will be an Excel workbook that you can download. It has input sheets where you can enter all the information and assumptions on personnel, on raw material costs, on SG&A, all of that, and it provides some suggestions for you as well. And there's also a 40-page workbook that you can download, and it walks you through every detail. And also you can download a fully comprised workbook. I think it's Anne's Nursery. So you see all of her financial projections. You see 12 months in the first year, annual thereafter for 5. You get the detailed income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement. There's even a break even tab that shows you when you break even. And there's also ratios on an analysis page that will be very helpful as you talk to potential investors or lenders. I really don't believe there's a better Excel workbook on the internet, and it's free from SCORE. Now, we're not going to go through the workbook here. That would probably take a whole afternoon. But you should plan to go to that website and familiarize yourself with this Excel workbook, because it's going to be very critical in supporting your business plan. Now let's switch gears for a minute. The likelihood that your startup will get financed by a bank is slim to none. I know that's hard to hear, but remember, we're talking about idea stage to break even. In over 30 years of banking, I only financed one startup. And it was a company that was looking to borrow $1 million up front. They were going to pay it off over 5 years. And the only way that we made the loan was that one of the founders' fathers had a stock portfolio. And at the time, it was valued at $1.5 million. So he gave us the stock. We actually put it in the vault. And he also signed over stock powers for every certificate. So in the next 5 years, if we got uncomfortable with the way anything was going on, we could immediately sell the stock and pay our loan off. And if the collateral value of the stock, which we were managing every day, fell below a threshold, we could liquidate and still have enough money to pay ourselves out. Well, let me help you with that as a backdrop. Let me help you to understand how a bank thinks. Begin by thinking that you are an investor in public company stock. Now, you buy that stock for one primary reason. You want to participate in the company's upside over time, your horizon, whatever. But you know that if that company goes bankrupt, you're going to lose everything. But you're willing to take that risk because of the upside participation potential, right? Now, put a banker's hat on. You know that a bank lends money, and if the company goes bankrupt, the bank could lose everything. The big difference, though, is that they don't participate in the company's upside. Their upside is capped by the interest rate on the loan. So you loan $1 million and you have a current interest rate. And if the company turns into the next Amazon in the 5 years, you don't get paid back any more than the interest rate and the principal. So because you don't participate in the upside as a bank, they want to make sure that there are two legitimate sources of repayment. And the first one is cash flow. So they look at your projections, they compare it to other companies in your same space. They take a look at your assumptions, and based on what they know about that industry space, they might haircut what you're doing. They may think that you're a little too ambitious. And therefore, they come up with their own set of projections in a worst case scenario, maybe best case. And then at that point in time, if they don't think there's enough cash flow to pay the loan back during the term, they'll say no. But even if they do believe there is, they want a second reliable source of repayment, and that is typically the liquidation of collateral. And so they will go through the process of taking a look at the number of receivables you hope to accomplish, the inventory you have, if you have equipment or real estate, and the finished goods and all of that, and they will determine what they think they can get in an auction in selling each of those assets. And at that point, if they don't think that there's enough room to have their loan paid back, they'll say no. But you have to realize, as a startup, you don't have a history. And therefore, they're looking for the first time at a company's set of projections, but they have no way to gauge your projections to past performance. And you don't have any collateral either. You don't have any money. You're looking for money to buy collateral. And if you put those two things together, that's why banks rarely, if ever, will lend money to a startup before break even. Well, where can you go? Well, here's the start of a list. You know, on the left-hand side, we're talking about equity, which means that there's ownership connected with it. And on the right-hand side, you've got debt, which doesn't signify ownership, but certainly these are places that you can go to get sources of capital to fund your business. Now, just for a minute, take a look at that asterisk by banks and credit unions guaranteed by the SBA. Now, the SBA really doesn't lend any money, but it guarantees loans made by other financial institutions. And the way that works typically is if the bank, let's say, is lending $100,000 and they look at the receivable balances, what they have in inventory and equipment, and make their determination about how much money they would be able to get in a liquidation at an auction if they had to, if you went bankrupt. And let's assume that they think that they can only get $50,000 for the liquidation of that collateral. Well, you want to borrow 100,000, they think they can only get 50 at auction, so they will say no. And that's where the SBA comes in. The SBA comes in, and based on their determination, they will guarantee up to 75% of the loan. So the bank says, okay, my exposure is 100,000. I think I can get in liquidation by 50. And because they're going to guarantee 75%, I've got kind of a $125,000 of support for a $100,000 loan. I can make that loan. So that's how the SBA works with banks and funds. Now, this is a very busy chart, and you're going to see it many times during the rest of this presentation. I put this together to present to a number of existing businesses in Chicago during the last Great Recession, because they didn't feel that their banks were helping them. Their lines of credit were being canceled. If they went to another bank to borrow, the bank would say no. And so these guys got together and came to SCORE and said, well, what can we do? The banks are shutting us out. So if you look at this chart, there are no banks included in this access to capital scheme. So we're going to focus on those clouds that are highlighted in the grayish blue, because those are ones that apply to the startup we're talking about until break even. The other clouds are applicable to companies that have been in business for a much longer period of time. Companies that have at least a track record of operating results for a year or two minimum. So for example, if you look at alternative lending, those platforms, typically they're looking for consistent monthly sales that they can rely upon. And usually you don't get that until you're operating for a year to a year and a half. Sometimes it might be as early as 6 months, but you've got to have an operating history in order to entertain the alternative lenders. So let's start by talking about micro lenders. Micro lenders are primarily intermediaries between sources of funds directed towards disadvantaged areas and the actual needs in those areas. And that's why most of these financial institutions are not-for-profit and they operate locally. The Community Reinvestment Act requires all banks to lend to disadvantaged areas. And so banks contribute to micro lenders and even participate directly with those lenders to provide support for companies, because that's how they get CRA credit to comply with the Fed's guidelines. And that has to happen every year. So these these micro lenders are certified by the U.S. Department of Treasury as Community Development Financial Institutions, or CDFIs. And there are 36 certified CDFIs headquartered in Illinois today, and 87 CDFI branches that operate within the state. So there's widespread activity. Now, some programs can also get support from the Small Business Administration because the SBA micro loan program guarantees up to 85% of the loans that are made. But the key here is that your business needs to qualify because of low income or disadvantaged status. And so typically, it's very friendly to minorities and to women. And unlike banks, they are much more friendly to startups as well. Now, my experience is that much of the lending is directed towards real estate and real estate development, but it's also available to startup companies for working capital and for equipment purchases. So that means working capital means you can buy inventory with it. Now, some of the loans are secured, and that's true especially for real estate. And sometimes you need a cosigner. But in many, many cases, the loans are unsecured. And that is good for startups in our world here because you don't have any assets yet. Now, typically, those loans are for $50,000 or less, and the rates vary. Nationwide, depending on the circumstance, they can be anywhere as low as 4% and as high as 36%, depending. Now, the microloans guaranteed by the SBA in 2023, they averaged $13,000 and the rate was somewhere between 8% and 13%. Now, on that busy slide I showed you earlier, I listed Allies for Community Business, which, by the way, used to be Axion. I listed Greenwood Archer Capital, which used to be C&I Microfinance, and also Community Reinvestment Fund USA as probably the 3 biggest players in Chicago. Now, if you want to learn more about this space, visit cdfi.org. That's the trade group that supports micro lenders across the United States. You can also go to the Opportunity Finance Network, OFN.org, because that's a group of CDFIs that have combined together so that they can lend and then share the risk amongst their members. And they have some interesting information there as well. All right, well, that is all in a nutshell about micro lenders. Now let's go to family and friends. Family and friends, believe it or not, invest between $50 and $75 billion annually in startups. You know, that's 2 to 3 times the money invested by angel investors and venture capitalists in startups. So this is a critical part of startup financing. And in fact, according to Fundable, 38% of startups receive funding from family and friends. Now, as a participant in this webinar today, as a follow-up, you'll receive SCORE Chicago's Family and Friend Funding Guide. It's a 5-page write-up put together by yours truly, but it goes through a lot more detail on how to approach and take advantage of this source of capital. But the trickiest part of family and friends financing is that you really don't want to lose money that a family member or a friend has invested in you. So you're walking this tightrope of mixing business and family friendships and whatnot. So my advice is, first, only approach people that can afford to lose the money. I think this is the most heavily weighted criterion. Now, as a frame of reference, pension funds and other institutional investors typically only allow 5% or less of the total capital to be allocated to risky assets. And you should use that same frame of reference with family and friends. They should only be investing a small portion of their net worth in you. Now, you should also, so if Uncle Fred, for example, if you find out that Uncle Fred has $100,000 of net worth, you should only be asking for $5,000 or less from Fred. And you should only take money, again, from sophisticated and well-connected people. Because not only are they going to ask you the tough questions that will ultimately benefit you in the long run, but they will also be good supporters for you. Better yet, aim at individuals that have experience running a business. They've been in your shoes. They understand a lot of what you're going through. And if a family member or a friend has previously invested in a startup or early stage, that's even better because they understand the experience. Avoid taking dumb money. You want your seed investors working for you to help you with the next stage potentially. And don't press for money from people that are uncertain because they're the first to complain when things get rocky. So again, avoid any potential drama or stress. Believe me, you're going to have enough of that in your startup approach already. But once you have some targets, really begin to develop a relationship first. Ask for their reaction to your startup business concept before you even ask for money. You can always ask later, but you want to get them engaged in the process, and sharing your business plan with them will be another way to really increase their potential interest. But that business plan has to include validation of the market for your business product or service. And it also has to have financial projections so they can see, how the money is going to be used and how they may or may not benefit. But it's another way to approach this is not to ask for everything all up front, but to break it into pieces that come at milestones. And we'll get to that in a minute. Now, most of the money that's raised from family and friends is debt that has to be paid back. Sometimes equity is involved where you have to give up a share of the business because that's what they want. And that family and friends financing guide that you'll get will walk you through some of the issues that you'll need to address in order to make decisions on whether or not that works for you. Now, there's been a shift in the last 5 years or so from less rigid repayment arrangements towards more structured agreements. So you got to be prepared for that. It's not just a handshake and a check. There's a lot more to it, even though it's a family or a friend. And that's the way I think it should be anyway, but it's gotten a lot more restrictive that way. And you also have to put your cards on the table. Even though you believe that the business is going to succeed, there's a lot of risk in a startup succeeding. Now, if you've never looked at a public company's 10K report, you should go online and look at one. So pick a stock, go to their investment web tab and look for a 10K. And in there, that's their annual report to the SEC. In there will be a section called risk issues. And the management of the company identifies what they think are the most salient risk issues that they face in the coming years or going forward. And then they provide how they think they can avoid or mitigate those risks so that the investor will feel comfortable with buying the stock. And that's the way public companies deal with risk. And you should do it the same way. You should be very upfront about what you think are the big risks. And demonstrating the quality of your due diligence is critical, especially with evidence that your idea has indeed some viable traction. And then you got to manage expectations. It's best practice to continue a periodic and regular dialogue. It could be email, it could be whatever, but letting them know about how things are progressing is very important. And recognize that you have to be honest. You have to say what you think is going well and the things that you think could be going better. Remember, you might be able to come back to these guys, so that having that kind of ongoing relationship is important. Remember, no lender or investor likes surprises. So endeavor to alert each supporter of any suspicions that you have about change. Now, this is a list. I put this list together for funding milestones, but it's also business milestones. So how do you use this? I'll give you a couple examples. Let's assume that you and Uncle Fred have decided that there's going to be some money that'll change hands, but you've agreed that the first doesn't get paid until you've found a web designer. And so you find a web designer, and it's going to cost you $500 to create your website. And you go to Fred and say, here's the guy, here's the proposal, here's why I think they're a good choice. Can I get $500 to pay for the web design? So that's to me, that's a great way of thinking about how to use milestones to periodically get money to be able to fund you. They may be willing to say yes on a piecemeal basis. And if you have, again, multiple sources, as I highly recommend, if Fred says no, maybe you can go to Aunt Alice and she'll say yes if he doesn't want to deal with the milestones. Anyway, think about that as a way to approach family and friends. Now let's go to donation funding. Right, that's raising money through an internet platform. Everybody's familiar with that. And you should also be familiar that any money you raise on a donation platform is a gift. It doesn't need to be paid back. So that's very critical. You know, donation funding has helped launch 1 million startups since it started in 2000, but it's changed a bit in the last couple of years. The biggest players on the left-hand side are traditional ones, and you should be familiar with all of those. They're the conventional platforms. But the second column represents the newer subscription-based approach, and we're going to talk about both of those. Now, this is where a business plan is probably going to be of little use to you, because the conventional platforms attract donors that are interested in projects, in causes, not a business specifically. So you're going to have to change your thought process a little bit to align with the population platforms. But you've got to have a really great story that connects. Let me give you an example. There was a woman here in Chicago that wanted to start a business of transporting school children from parents who are both working to and from school every day. And if you're in that category, you know how awkward it is to, have jobs and have to deal with transporting kids. So she thought she was fulfilling a very important thing. So when she went to get insurance for her automobile, the insurance companies said, well, you're really in our limousine category, and therefore, as a startup, you're going to have $10,000 up front to get insurance. And everybody was saying the same thing. Well, she didn't have that money. So she went to the donation platform, and basically her story was the big bad insurance companies are asking for this money as like a ransom. And all I'm trying to do is to help working couples in the city of Chicago to transport their kids. She got her money. The story really connected. Now, the conventional platforms have some sort of reward typically associated with the funding to the donors. It could be you're on a pre-ordering list, maybe you get a discount on the first run, all sorts of different kind of rewards. But they also provide a great deal of assistance for the campaign and you need to look at that support to see which really connects best with you and what you're trying to accomplish. But you shouldn't be looking at this as a one-time event. You should treat givers or donors as stakeholders that you might go back to in the future. The platforms provide you with the dollars given, who did it, They provide vehicles for contact information so that you can provide updates to the donors and take surveys. All of that sort of stuff is available to you. So going back to that population can be very successful. Peak Design, which is a maker of outdoor gear, they went back 5 times from startup through their product. And the last time they went, they raised 4.9 million. So as they were getting more successful, they were getting more support, and it just kind of mushroomed after that. But you also need to recognize you have to create your own outreach program to get people to come to the platform. You cannot just rely upon the platform's population. So you go to your friends, you go to family, you go to potential suppliers, potential customers, and invite them to your campaign. And I can't stress this enough. You've really got to be assertive and aggressive in this in order to make this work. Now, the schedules here are split between fixed programs and flexible ones. Fixed programs are when you set a bogey, you want to raise $25,000. If you raise 24,500, you get nothing. A flexible program is different because they will allow you to keep the 24,500, but because you didn't reach your bogey, they typically would charge you a higher fee, and it could be twice as much. Also, what comes out of the proceeds is payment processing fees for all of the people that are sending their processing charges through the banks. The banks are charging processing fees, and that could be anywhere from 1.5% to 3% of what you raise. But it's interesting if you take a look at the statistics that all or nothing campaigns get fully funded at twice the rate of flexible ones. And if you think about it, that makes some sense. If you know that you've got to get every dollar of your bogey filled or you get nothing, you're going to work really hard to do it. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Overall, campaigns average raising $7,000. And the successful ones, which are the ones that reach their bogeys typically, they raise an average of 28,000. The biggest raise ever was 20.3 million on Kickstarter back in 2015. Pebble Technologies was promoting a new smartwatch, and they wanted to raise $500,000 for marketing, and they raised 20 million. And the company was bought by Fitbit, by the way, 2 years later. Now, subscription-based donation funding platforms are not for everyone. These platforms enable you to get a predictable revenue stream from supporters who are making these recurring payments. And this whole section was designed primarily for content creators of digital products like videos or podcasts or ebooks, things of that nature. The founders needed to provide a stream of products on a regular basis to sustain the subscribers. But it's possible for this kind of platform to provide some funding for a startup. One option is to provide an exclusive product as a subscription reward. So you're basically manufacturing something that isn't available to the rest of the public, just for the subscribers. And it's that kind of reward that could regularly sell your goods and raise money. And the real benefit is having sales, but it's the profitability. The other option is to potentially sell products directly to the subscribers through the platform. And some platforms allow you to do that. But it really requires you as the seller to handle all the fulfillment that's required in the shipping and payment and all that other stuff. So these subscription-based platform approaches seem to offer, I'd consider, marginal funding opportunities. But I've added it here this year because the approach is probably going to evolve over time. And so keep track of what's happening If you've got a product that has a recurring nature to it in terms of purchase, then this could be a really good approach. I often get questions about funding for nonprofits, and while I have not much, if any, experience, I thought I would add that these are 9 well-recognized donation platforms that nonprofits can use, not only to raise money, but then to manage the relationship with the donors. So now let's jump to funding groups, to angel groups, sorry. Angels are wealthy and successful business people who are interested in investing their own money in startups and early stage businesses. Some angels work alone and some angels work in a group. And Shark Tank, I think, is probably the best example I can give as to what an angel really looks like. And this slide shows the top 7 angel groups in Chicago at this point. Now, seed capital, which you see on this slide, often refers to that first formal funding stage in a growing business. Now, generally, angels see themselves as filling the gap between family and friends and venture capital firms. So they see them in that arena. And they're typically interested in debt. They're typically not interested in debt. They're interested in equity. So if they're going to provide any kind of a debt product, it's going to have to be converted into equity. They're not interested in the day-to-day operation of the business, however. They're routinely satisfied with only a minority stake in the business. So it could be 10%, it could be 20%. So still, you're in control of what's going on. Oftentimes, they want to be involved. So if there's a board they may require a board, they'd like to have a seat on it because they'd like to participate in the real meaty decisions. But they've got a shorter time horizon than other potential investors. They're looking 5 to 10 years, that's typical, but they want a full or a partial exit during that period to recoup the investment and that they can redeploy elsewhere. The average individual investment from an angel is $50,000. The median is 25. So that gives you some idea that really fits nicely with the startup numbers we talked about very early in the presentation. But there is a big difference between individual angels and angel groups. Angel groups are much more formal. They often anticipate being part of the next unicorn or big IPO. So their short-term horizons have gotten shorter and they're looking for much greater upside. And really the other thing that's interesting is that if you go to an angel or particularly an angel group, and you haven't raised money from family and friends, they won't even review you. Many of them won't, because they're saying, hey, if family and friends who know you best aren't willing, why should we? Because we don't know you. A central part of all of this discussion with angels or angel groups is the company valuation. If you ever watch Shark Tank, which I'm sure you have, that's where a lot of the conversations kind of get sour or get done, is about the valuation. Well, we're not going to talk about valuation here again, but you should know that that's a critical part of dealing with angels. And so getting your house in order on that score would be important. We could do a whole workshop on it. It's definitely easier to find angel groups than it is individual angels. By the way, I gave you the 7 biggest ones in Chicago already. But it's often said that 90% of invested dollars come from warm introductions. So that's why you need to network. If you're not on LinkedIn, join it, because it's going to be critical for you for your business. And anytime you meet someone and talking about your business, You need to always ask for introductions every time. A key question is, who else should I be talking to about this? That's the way you can start to get referrals and work your way into a warm introduction to an angel group or to an angel. Another approach is to subscribe to an angel funding platform where you can orchestrate your pitch and broadcast that to the angel network to raise funds. And the Angel Investment Network, that's really the largest one in the world. And Chicago is one of their targeted cities, by the way. But it costs, to be part of the platform, it costs about $229 a month. And they help you to package and disseminate your pitch. Ask for Funding is another angel platform, and their subscription is $160 a month. Each of these you can cancel at any time. But the point is, there's other ways to reach individual investors through platforms. There's a little cost to go on. And write this down. Write RAMP, RAMP.com. Last month I came across ramp.com for the first time. And what they say is that you can download a venture capitalist and angel investor database for free. I don't know how good it is, but it's probably worth checking out. The largest trade association is the Angel Capital Association, and they represent the angel industry. And so it's a great source to find studies, characteristics, white papers about the space, so that you can learn more about how angels think and how to approach them and all of those sorts of things. But the bar is higher if you have an aggressive ambition and you expect substantial growth. Then approaching angel groups is critical. You just need to know that there's a high bar. Angel groups have gotten much more selective. They're looking for more early traction in the marketplace than before. So this means you have to either have a growing existing customer base or a confirmed growth of potential customers. Now, most groups have identified what their industry segment preferences are. And it's silly not to take advantage of that, but recognize if you're not part of that list, they're probably going to turn a deaf eye. And that's probably the most important thing to recognize. So what are the ones that are really interested? Most are interested. They're interested in health tech and life sciences, biotech, fintech, AI, green tech, and e-commerce. Those are the areas in which angels are just drooling to find ways to invest. Now, while they'll focus on the financial projections, that will be very critical to them. It will be central to coming up with their valuation and have that discussion with you. Angel groups have gotten increasingly more interested in the team of the company. So they're really interested in the passion and in the expertise of the team. And then they make a determination based on interviews and how coachable the team is. Obviously, the more passionate and the greater the expertise in the space that you're in and being coachable, they like that. So that's important. Again, you need to be able to validate that you have a unique selling proposition. And so that's where they're going to spend a lot of time of their, focus, because that gives them a sense of whether or not your financial projections are believable or not. Now, managing angel group solicitation really takes some time, by the way, and they get scores of investment opportunities every week. And that's why the warm introductions are important. Something comes in cold, they want to find a way to say no to it so that they don't spend time on stuff that they don't like. They want to spend time on stuff that they think will work. The reality is you're going to have to probably present to 10 to 12 angel groups to get one successful funding. And in order to get 10 to 12 appointments, you've probably got to reach out to 30 to 50 angel groups. And that's with warm introductions. So this is a big deal. You got to recognize angel groups are interested in unicorns, aggressive businesses that expect to grow very fast. If your business isn't that, then an individual angel is where you need to go. But these are 4 examples of platforms that help you manage the prospecting process for approaching angel groups. They provide the backbone and infrastructure to assist in that process. So if you've got meaningful ambitions, then you need to be looking into these websites. Now let's take a little detour here. Many folks have asked whether or not credit cards can be used for business startups, so I've added this section, and they can be helpful. But first, you have to assume that your business has launched successfully, but you're short of break even. So as long as you have good, healthy personal credit and you have income to prove that you'll be able to pay your bills, getting a credit card is not going to be that hard. Now, by healthy, I mean the minimum credit rating would be 670 to 690, if not 700. And most business credit cards will require a personal guarantee. So if your rating is good and you can show adequate income, this can be a source of funding. Virtually all business credit card applications are made online. So you're going to be asked to provide the company's legal name, whether it's a corporation, LLC, partnership, sole proprietor, what kind of industry, number of years in existence, number of employees, sales, all of that sort of stuff is going to have to be there. But what if you haven't launched yet? Generally, you need a business to open a business credit card. But what exactly is a business? It is possible to get a business credit card if you earn money independently. This could be from your current job. It could be from part-time income through, let's say you're a freelance writer, you sell goods online or do consulting, whatever. If you've got an independent source of income, then you list yourself as the sole proprietor in the business identification section. And then you put your social security number rather than an employer tax ID number in the space. So you don't necessarily have to run a company to get a business credit card. It's having the right outside income that's important. And those rates for those cards are typically, 20 to 30% annually. Now, for many startups, a business credit card can be difficult, if not impossible, to obtain without having good credit. And if you've got bad credit or no credit, your business credit card options are really limited. But you're not without options. A secured business credit card may be of some help. So write this down: creditcardbroker, all one word, .com. And if you go to that website and scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see Secured Credit Card tab, and click on that, and it will walk you through how a secured credit card works. Typically, you make a deposit of money, let's say a minimum of $200 to $500, and then you use that money with the credit card to buy things. Now, you might say, well, that's where a family and friend can come into hand. So you can go to Uncle Fred and say, I need to buy materials and office supplies and whatnot. And so if you could give me a deposit of $500 on a secured credit card, then I will be able to buy that stuff. And that's another way to get funds from Fred to be able to be used in your business channel growth. Now, you can also get somebody to make you an authorized user. And that's where you even get your name on the card. But you're not responsible for those charges at the end of the day. The other person is. So you got to have a very good relationship with them. But there again, that's where a family and friend might be able to provide an authorized user to you so that you could use it, and that's part of the financing. When talking with the credit card companies, they're going to ask you for income information, but you know what? They typically don't they don't validate it. So what happens if you exaggerate your income? Well, that's considered loan application fraud. That the bottom line is, don't exaggerate your income, be honest and be accurate. Well, remember, our objective today was to deal with what we call startups, which are those highlighted boxes until you break even. That's the idea stage or pre-seed stage. And that's where we have focused. And this has been the backdrop for many of the sources of capital that we've talked about. But I know it can be confusing to try to have all of these things spinning in your head at the same time. What you're going to also get as a participant today in this webinar is a picture about how startup funding works. This picture, I think, should help bring together all of these pieces from beginning to end so that they can make some sense to you. So it's a pretty big picture, by the way. And so I had to put it on a slide and break it into two pieces. So this is the top half of the slide of the picture, and that's the bottom half of the slide. And just to let you know, this option pool thing with the blue, it's too complicated to cover here. We're not going to talk about it. But aside from that, I think this could be very useful. So let's assume at the very start, which is on the far left-hand side, you're a founder, you own 100% of the business, you've got the idea stage going on, and you need to raise some money. And so you bring on a co-founder. And so now let's assume you're a 50-50 partnership and you're going to be working together to make this thing happen. But as things move along, you realize that you need more cash than what you bootstrapped. And so you've determined that for the near term, you need $15,000, and you know that Uncle Fred might be willing to contribute that because he's got enough net worth, and you'd probably have to give him a 5% share of the business at this point. So what happens is that you have your 50-50 partnership, and then go to founder the next one where you're splitting the pie with Uncle Fred. And he's getting 5%, and your percentage and your partner's percentage goes down. But things are going good, but after 6 months, you're starting to run out of Uncle Fred's money. And so now you want to go to approach an angel. That's kind of the seed stage. And you really need cash at this point. You can see what's going to happen, and you need $200,000. You can see that on the bottom left-hand side of this slide. So you need $200,000. And to get that, you've got to convince an angel group or angel that your business is worth $1 million. And let's say you wind up doing that. So you go through the drill, you raise the money, and what happens is that now Uncle Fred's share of the business declines, you and your partner's share declines, and now the angel has a 16.7% of the business for their $200,000 investment. Now your business is streaming along. You're hiring people, you're growing, but scaling your business more is really going to take some money. So the next stop is to go to a venture capitalist and raise money with a Series A funding. You've determined with your partners and with the angel that you need $2 million from one or more venture capitalists to meet your needs for the next few years. And let's assume that you can convince them that it's worth that kind of money. So they invest the $2 million in your business, and here, look what happens to the pie. Uncle's share goes down to 2.6. You're now down to 19% with your partner. The angel group declines to 10, and now the venture capitalist has a 33% share of your business. And things are going absolutely great at this point. And finally, in talking with the investment banking business, they say, your business is going super gangbusters. You're going to need some real money. We think you should go public. And so you're going to raise $235 million in the public market because your business, we think, is worth $2.6 billion. And so you go to the public market, you raise the money, and the public market now owns 8%. The partners are 17, the venture capital is 30, and the angel is under 10. And so that's the way all of this stuff works. You know, you owned 100% of nothing at the beginning, but at the end of the day, you own 17% of a $2.6 billion company. And that's the way these pieces fit together for a typical startup that goes from idea to IPO. Well, our job today was to help you learn a little bit more about how to fund a startup. And I know we covered a lot of material. I told you it would be an inch deep and a mile wide. I hope we accomplished something today. If nothing else, I hope I made you think. Thanks again for signing on. I appreciate it. And I'm available now to answer whatever questions are posted.
So Jeffrey, Stephanie wants to know, how do you get the start of costs?
How to get the startup costs?
How do you get, yeah.
You have to begin. I gave you a website to start with, which is the 5-minute lesson, 5-minute class. But you have to begin to talk with someone who's familiar with all the components that are needed. So you know that there's going to be some personnel costs, there's going to be some fringe benefits, there's going to be supplies, there's going to have to be maybe some equipment, maybe you have to buy a copy machine. You know, those are the things that go into determining what is involved in that initial one-time purchases before you launch. After you launch, you'll probably have marketing expenses. Maybe you have to pay rent, all of those things. But that's where a SCORE mentor would really be helpful, because you can go in with a beginning list, and then they can begin to challenge whether or not that's complete or not. And that's the best way I can think of to come up with it. The other thing is to go to that website, to go to score.org and look at Ann's Nursery, because Ann's Nursery, while it may not be your kind of business, will give you a lot of details about all the components in the cost structure.
Celia wants to know, will the slides be made available? And can she get a list of the websites mentioned?
The slides will be available. I will be sending them to BACP afterwards, and they will send those out to you, as well as the Family and Friends funding guide and the How Startup Works picture.
An anonymous attender says, it seems like a lot of the information is geared towards product businesses. What would be good funding resources for service-based businesses?
They're all the same sources, by the way. Just recognize that the way in which you have to approach as a service business might be a little different tact, but they're all the same sources. You can get funding for a service business by going to Family and Friends, by going to a micro lender. And some angels indeed will finance service businesses. But the key is to be able to provide what I call that evidence of traction in the marketplace, which you will have to have done some market research to do that. And also showing that there's some there's some actual moat around your business, that there's something that you do that has a distinct advantage. And if you've got those two things together, you can begin to get funding for a service business.
The anonymous attendee said, if I decide to take the angel investor track, can you give me any pointers for approaching an initial meeting? Do you know anyone on the West Suburban Angel Investor Committee?
No, I do not know anyone in that on that committee. But again, I've given you ample locations where you can go to get information about how best to have that first initial meeting. What's involved, what you have to be providing. You know, at some point in time with an angel group, you're going to have to, and that's why those sources about how to manage that solicitation are important, because you're going to have to provide a data room online as an example. So they will help you construct that. They will build a data room. They'll tell you what needs to be in it, all of those things. So that's why those websites I've listed are ones that will really help you navigate that first meeting and thereafter, actually.
Janelle wants to know, can you repeat the website for secure credit card information?
Creditcardbroker.com.
Adam says, if there's a business that can be started unofficially, say selling shirts or an event or a product, is it better to form it officially at the onset or wait until there's been success, then start building an official business?
Well, that's a very interesting question. There's lots of situations where somebody has done something on the side, and once it gets established and critical, they start a business. And that's perfectly justified. I'll give you an example. If anyone knows about the business called Drybar, this started with a woman who was doing hair, just cut and blow dry, around her neighborhood. And she was doing this after hours. And at some point in time, she realized that there was such a demand for her business, she quit her job and with her husband invested to lease out a location in which she could actually lease space and bring customers to her. And eventually she turned it into a $50 million business with locations in 30 states. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with starting something part-time, and then once it gets some traction, to take it to the next step. I think that's a good way to go. It may be harder you won't be able to get money probably from a micro lender or an angel, but you might be able from family and friends at that point.
Jenny wants to know, what about funding to start a nonprofit?
Well, I showed you a slide on there were 9 sources that I showed. I do not handle nonprofit businesses. You know, it's donation based, and that's really critical. But I urge you to go, when you get the slides, you could go to those websites and they will tell you how to manage the donor relationships as well as how to raise money for a nonprofit.
Wallace wants to know, what are your favorite ways to validate a startup idea, and what's the smartest way to do this?
Well, there's a webinar that I put on called The Startup Challenge: Is Your Dream Built to Succeed? And that I'll have this on for BACP and for SCORE later on in the year. But it's all about doing market research, leveraging market research platforms, and getting surveys out there so that you can come back with information that shows that people are interested.
Abel wants to know, how do you get a SCORE mentorship in the food business?
You get a SCORE mentorship. I'm not sure I understand the question, but if what you're looking for is a mentor who has knowledge of the food business, that's where you can go to score.org Chicago and sign up to meet with a mentor. And if you need to request food industry, you can do it.
Rich wants to know, can you show the 9 sources slide again?
There you go.
And Marnika wants to know, can you email her the blueprint to this webinar, which everyone will receive?
Well, BACP is going to do that.
Mhm. That, I think, is all of the questions. Let me check. Wallace wants to know, what are your favorite ways to validate an idea?
Well, I'll give you the step process. You need to do personal face-to-face interviews to see if there's how people really deal with the issue that you're trying to have a product or service about. And that's how you begin to understand how things and what's important to them. And if you have something that you think works, then you have to go out and do a problem-solving set of interviews. And once you do that, you can do some surveys on the internet or through your social media pages to get feedback from the marketplace. And that gives you the fodder that should be able to give you the validation you need. And I go into a lot more detail in the Startup Challenge webinar.
Adam says his wife has an LLC and she's considering dissolving it. She has a business credit card. Is it better to pivot if there's only minimum maintenance costs or close it out altogether?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Abel wants to know, is there any books you would recommend for startups?
Not really. I mean,
Mhm.
the websites, there's a lot more online than there is in books. And it changes constantly. So there's a regeneration of information. And in that Startup Challenge webinar, I give you, it's a list of, I think, 12 or 13 websites that are specifically geared towards startup founders.
Donna recommends The Lean Startup is a good book. And then Brandy also confers that The Lean Startup is highly recommended by many.
Yeah, it can be good.
And Felicia said ChatGPT is a big help also. Jeffrey, I think that answers all of the questions. Thank you so much for the information. I know I took copious notes. Hopefully everyone else did. At this time, we're going to turn it back over to BACP. Remember, if you are looking for free mentorship, you can always go to www.score.org/Chicago. BACP, back to you.
Hi, everybody. This is Marty with BACP. Thank you all for attending today's webinar. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and will be available on our YouTube page, youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. It will be uploaded on Monday, so you can view it. And thank you all for coming. Thank you, Jeffrey, Velveeta. Thank you to our ASL interpreters, and everybody have a wonderful weekend.
And good luck to everybody.
And good luck to everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.